final speaker for today. Man, what a beautiful day. Hasn't it been a great day? Just a hand for you guys for sticking around. It's been so wonderful. So thank you for staying this long. So we've got, as Christine mentioned, when she gave you a little framework of the teams of mental health, we've tried to incorporate that team approach here today too. We've got psychiatrists who work on common mental illness, serious mental illness, psychologists who are focusing on trauma, therapists, and a very integral part of the team that we want to bring as well is therapists who also focus not just on individual, but on family and relationships. And Makar Naguib is the prime person that we were so blessed to be able to have with us today here. So I have his bio, but I want to just tell you a little bit off the dome. I've known Makar for 20 years, which has been a blessing for me. I've just been learning from him over the past 20 years, and God willing, 20, 40, 60 more in our friendship. Makar, besides on his regular day job, because he was just like, this is too easy. I'm going to get my MBA in one of the best places in the world. Just going to go do that and become like a high-powered bank guy and do the bank thing. But that's boring. Let me really focus and go back at my master's and be able to add to the work that I've been doing in the church. He's been serving the church for at least the past 15 years, if not more. And it was Nyack College, right? When Nyack College, he got his master's degree in family counseling, marriage and family counseling. And he's able to come with us today to give that perspective of both the relationship of marriage and family counseling and the role of Christian counseling in general. Those two things, how do they relate to what we're talking about here today? So we're just so blessed and fortunate to have Makar Naguib with us. Please, a warm hand of welcome.
All right, so this is like the most effective microphone that we've ever listened to. I think like Abuna said, I kind of just want to get rid of it right now because it's doing nothing for any of us. So, all right, I'm gonna try without. Is that gonna be okay without? I just want to, because like when you think something is working, so you keep trying like the microphone and also some issues in our lives. My main objective for this presentation, God willing, by God's grace, is I want to leave all of you with some skills that you can implement to be very supportive in your community, right? Because, it is important to have psychiatrists, psychotherapists, counselors, social workers, all of that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that because it's extremely important. But also, I don't want you to feel like there is nothing that can be done without them, right? I don't want you to feel that either, right? I want all of you, to start to learn some skills to support the community. But one of the skills that you're going to need to know is when you need to refer, right? When you need bigger help, right? More experienced help. So that's what we're going to talk about too. And also one last thing is you need to have a framework for how God works. How God works. Because I'm sad to say in society now, we're in such an individualistic society. Nobody wants to hear anything about God. We want to go about things with science and rely only on our minds. But our minds, as we're spending this whole time talking, our minds are imperfect, right? There's brokenness in our thinking, right? So you can't just rely on your mind, right? You have to combine it all together. The first thing I want to say is how God works, right? And the first way that God works is just plain old a mystery, right? We have no idea how God works actually, right? We don't know, right? And I want you to keep this in mind because God does so many things in people's lives and we're just a piece of that. There's so much mystery that God is doing. He works in ways we do not understand. He's the one who gives the increase, and we have to build our faith in His love and care for all of us, okay? I just want you to know that, because, there's no way you're going to be supportive to someone if you ignore the God factor, right? You're going to do a little bit. You're going to do some nice helpful stuff, maybe a hug, maybe you're going to say something nice, maybe you're going to make a referral, right? But you can't ignore the existence of God, right? He's the one, He is the healer, right? He's the healer. So please, when you're talking with anyone, at any time, if you're in a conference room in a meeting at work, or you're talking with someone who needs help, please, like Nehemiah did, in a moment, just say, God, please help me. Please give me something. I need your help. I don't know the full answer. I don't know all the facts. I don't know, right? I need you in this time. God is the one who ultimately heals, and he works in a mysterious way. The other way that God works, right, and it's not exclusive of the first way, right? It's together, it's all together, but you need to see all of them together, is that God works through others. God works through others, right? And we are workers together with him, and he helps his own body take care of itself by his grace, right? So we are helping each other. This whole thing is about, people helping people by the grace of God and with skill. And there are professionals who do this, and then there's the community. And I want to talk about the professionals first. But I just want to show you some verses, because if anybody thinks that mystery or professionals or community are not valid things from a Christian perspective, I want to just shut that down quickly, because God wants all of these things to be working together. Just some quick verses. It says, "Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. A man's steps are of the Lord. How then can a man understand his own way?" Right? Like, there are things that are happening inside of us that cannot be fully understood with just us, because we are created by not us. We're created by God, right? So a way to understand the key to ourselves is to connect with the person who created us. What I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will know after this. And then, through others and professionals, there's a beautiful chapter in the book, The Wisdom of Sirach in the Bible. It says in chapter 38, it actually talks about physicians, and it says, but this applies to any skilled profession, right? It says, "And he gave skill to men that he might be glorified in his wonders." It says, "And keep in touch with your physician. For the Lord created him, and do not let him leave you, for you need him." And also in the book of Exodus, when God is telling Moses about the tabernacle, he starts to tell him about people who are skilled in working with bronze, in working with metal, in working with wood, in working with all these things, right? So there is a very important role that God honors for the skilled in something, right? And being skilled in something is something you can learn, right? It's not like a personality thing. It's a skill, right? It's something you can learn, like riding a bike, right? So there is this important place for the skilled people. And lastly, which is what we're going to spend most of our time on after one more slide, is the community. The community, right? And I want to just tell you two examples. I think all of you know these two stories. One about the centurion whose servant was sick, and then the centurion, he honors God so much, he said, "I'm not even worthy to go see Jesus. I don't even need him to come and see me." So he sent his friends. He sent his friends to go to Jesus, to ask Jesus, "Can you please heal my servant?" The role of the friends here was to make that connection between God and the person in need. That was the role of the friends. And we all know the other important story, which is the man who was paralyzed for all these years, and his friends opened the roof up and brought him down in front of Jesus. What is the role of the friends again? It's the same role that all of us have in this community, right? Which is all of us need to be learning. How can we be these good friends, this supportive community to people around us, and how can we support them? And we're going to learn some skills. The last thing I want to say before these skills is specifically focused on what can a professional counselor do? Because let me just make this simple, right? When I went to school to study therapy, I was just sitting there. It was a Christian school, thank God. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, there is no way in the world I was going to learn this stuff without coming to school. Like, the concept, the little nuances, details about how systems work, how all these special terms. Like, have you guys ever heard of a term called triangulation? Have you ever heard of enmeshment? Right? There's all these are things you got to read a book about, and then you just keep hearing about them. One day, class. The sexuality. Oh my goodness. What an amazing class to learn, to sit there and learn about all these details about desire and arousal and pain and erectile dysfunction. Guys, there's so much that you need a professional for, right? And this stuff, like, let me just tell you, let me ask you a question. Any of you who confess, which I hope is all of us, when was the last time you sat in confession and you were silent with the priest for 30 seconds? Just thinking about something. We know most of us, confession these days is a right? And there's a lot of value in that, right? Because confession is not counseling, right? Confession is not counseling, right? But if you're in a therapy office, that silence for 30 seconds can be very, very important, right? Can be very important. Just a few days ago, I'm sitting with someone, and in second like 11 or 12, the person started crying, right? But it took 10 seconds to get there, right? That takes skill, right? To wait. Like, why wait in silence, right? That takes skill, right? And that skill can be learned. I'm not trying to say like it's only for a few people, right? It can be learned, but I just want to tell you that there is a role for the skilled people, right? What can a Christian counselor do? Identify and help intergenerational patterns. They can look and say, okay, like tell me about what happened in the generation above you, right? And find that it's repeating again and again and again, right? Assess systemic issues in relationships. One thing we think one thing that's very common is a couple or a family comes into the therapy office, and there's always like the presenting problem or the identified patient or whatever we're going to call them. Like there's the person who's doing the bad stuff, right? And then they come in like, and my husband did this, and my wife did that, right? And everybody, but what really is going on is it's a systemic issue. The system, there's a dance going on, right? Between these two. One does this, the next person does that, and the cycle continues. And you need someone to say, wait, you know what I noticed? I noticed that there's a cycle, there's a pattern. You guys are in a dance, and you need someone to do this. Help process life experience that negatively shaped your personhood and provide ways to change the impact of those experiences in the future, right? I love this, the presentation, I think is Dr. Christine still here, about, I can't see her, but about the PTSD, right? Because these things, they can shape something in you, right? And you need to do something healthy after those things happen so that you can ensure that the shaping is not negative, that it becomes positive, right? This is possible, but it needs a ton of work. Integrate spirituality in your journey to wholeness. You need someone to make that connection. By the way, many of us here, I think almost all of us, are Coptic Orthodox Christians. But spirituality does not mean the same thing even to every individual Coptic Orthodox Christian, right? We have the same faith, but what does it mean to me? What is my connection with God? That there's so much difference and diversity there, right? It's not bad, but it needs to be explored and worked on. Like, we can't just throw prayer at people, right? You know, there are some people where praying is not good for them, for their kids, right? A little bit of prayer, but not hours. Someone who has very, very deep anxiety, you get them to start praying for hours, their mind is gonna go and go and go and go and go. They could pray for hours and hours and hours, but they will destroy themselves in their thinking, right? So we have to combine these things in a healthy way. Not no prayer, but also we have to caution them from spending time praying but really ruminating, right? We have to manage these things. Suggest new ways of thinking about life's pressures and challenges, right? The resilience point was very important, that sometimes you can have you could see the challenge and you can fall and be crushed by the challenge, or you could see it as something else. Many times I'm sitting with a couple and they're like in a disaster, but somehow after some time I'm saying, you know, this couple could actually be helpful to so many other couples one day. They have that potential, right? They just have to get through this challenge. Clarify the precise emotions. Like, you know, a lot of times there are little feelings that we don't even realize we're having, and we need someone to help us assign words to those feelings so that we can manage the feelings, right? Without language and without assigning those words, you can't really do anything. Like, what are feelings without language, right? You're just an animal then, right? So you need the language, and you need to work through it, and like piece out the feelings, right? And see what's happening. In that moment, I got a little angry. In that moment, I felt insecure. And when I felt insecure, I did this, and I did that. And it resulted in all this stuff, right? Provide a standard structure for care while following ethical standards. Anyone who is licensed, I need you to know this, there are standards that they must follow, and that is one amazing benefit of being with a professional, right? That they're governed. They're governed, right? You go to a friend, and there's nothing governing them except hopefully their character and their faith, right? And lastly, they will treat you with respect, care, and patience. It's so sad when especially Egyptians, but in general, there's so much advice out there, right? Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has an opinion, right? I have an opinion too, right? Everybody has an opinion, right? And you could ask anybody in church, as long as they're like 3.1 years older than you, they feel like they know the answer to all your problems, right? They know what to tell you, they know what you should do, they know everything. They know nothing, right? They know nothing, right? They ask you no questions, right? All you do, you say what's going on, all the advice, pray, advice, fast, pray, advice, right? And that's not how this works, right? So the good thing about a professional Christian counselor is that they will respect the fact that you know more about your own situation than they do, right? A good counselor or a good therapist or a good psychiatrist, in many ways, is a student of their own client or patient, right? And that's very important, right? Because you're always ignorant of that person's circumstances at all times, okay? At all times. All right. So now we're going to talk about some stuff to prepare you, hopefully to serve around you. One is something is always going on. I want you to start with this assumption, okay? There's always something going on with the people around you and with yourself, okay? I want to give you an extreme example, but it's just an extreme example, right? In an intake, when a client comes in, you kind of ask a lot of general questions, right? Drugs, traumatic experiences, abuse, and all this stuff. It only took me a few months to expect an answer when I asked a question about abuse, right? Before, I used to think of abuse was an exception, right? But actually, I started to realize I need to actually be surprised when it's a no. Have you ever experienced any abuse, right? Most of the time, I was getting a yes. What? So, and that's an extreme example, right? How about just the usual stresses of life, right? We're dealing with them all the time. Is anybody here not stressed? I am so stressed. No, like there's so much stress in my life, right? All the time. Pressure, things, lack of sleep, right? Messages, all these things coming at us, right? So what I want you to do is the starting assumption is there is something going on. You just need to open your eyes and look, right? You need to look. There is something going on. The person next to you, the person who you are, there's something going on, right? I'm not saying how big or severe it is. I'm not saying that at all. But there's something, right? There's something, right? Stresses, challenges come and go. Even if you're not dealing with anything at this moment, you will later. Others who are dealing with something are likely affecting you, right? Dr. Christine was saying a very important thing, that sometimes the families of the healthcare workers can experience trauma, right? Sometimes somebody goes through something and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened to them? And then it starts to affect you, and you start to become hyper vigilant and scared that that thing might happen to you, right? Or you're just worried, or you don't know what's going to happen. You may be called by God to support someone who needs something right now. And we have to keep our ears open and our hearts open to this calling. The other thing too is you may be the only person that someone is willing to speak to right now. And that is such an important point, because to get to a professional, it requires either such a dire situation, like a desperate situation, or courage, bravery, humility, right? And of course also a lot of logistical things like money and things like that too, right? But you have to know that sometimes you're the only person that someone is willing to talk to in this moment. That first step might only be with you, and if it's not with you, it will never happen, right? So you have to be prepared. And the last thing is that time. People change over time and have different needs over time, and things like the severity of issues evolves. It's not just always going up, it's not always going down, it's not staying the same, it's always changing, right? So sometimes someone's going through something, in that moment they're not saying anything, but then you ask them a week later, and then all of a sudden something blew up, right? And so we have to be aware of this. So your starting assumption should always be that there's something going on. I want you also, please, my family, is sophisticate your thinking. Become more sophisticated. I don't mean sophisticated like arrogant. I mean become like smarter. Okay, that's it. All right? Like what that means is that there's no, like everything has dimensions. Okay? Like don't just think, oh, that person is sad, full stop, okay? No, there's a lot of things going on. There's dimensions, okay? There's details, okay? And please don't oversimplify anyone's life, okay? That's disrespectful, okay? It's inconsiderate. It's not what God does, right? God addresses every aspect of who you are, and you are an extension of, you do the work of God, right? So, sophisticate your thinking. Just look at all these circles, right? Simple circles. Body, spirit, culture, social life, family, soul, and mind. And if I was a little, ambitious with my PowerPoint, I would have drawn an arrow between all of these things, like all of these things. Because all of these things affect each other, right? It's not just one. It's not like, oh, okay, well, we'll treat the body, we're going to be good. Oh, we'll treat the spirit, we're going to be good. No, all these things affect each other, right? And so you could see already by now that this is like complicated. It's complex, right? There's a lot going on here, right? And if you just think of one thing, you're going to ignore all these other things. It's not just spiritual. It's not just physical. It's not just emotional. It's not just psychological. There's family, there's social environment, all this stuff. And culture. Every culture is broken. There's no perfect culture, right? And you have to know that. And every culture has subcultures, right? And every parish has its own culture, right? Every group of friends have their own culture. And every culture is broken in some way. So we have to think about all of these details whenever we're trying to be supportive to others. And last thing is, in every single one of these things, there is something that you can't control. Something you can't control. At least one thing, but usually it's hundreds, right? All right. Just a few considerations just to get you very comfortable with this idea of multiple dimensions, right? Your body, people can have health problems, brain chemistry, fatigue, drugs or medications, diet, right? I remember I was sitting with a couple, married for 12 or 13 years, hadn't had sex for 2 years, right? And they're married for all this time, right? And we're talking blah blah blah, and then after many sessions, the connection was made that one of the partners had like a health problem, a handicap, where they couldn't move, and it was affecting their intimacy, right? He couldn't move so easily, right? So it would create a lot of physical pain whenever they're trying to be intimate. I just missed that whole connection for so much time, right? And then what happens when these things start to step after step, right? You're having issues with your intimacy, you start to have insecurity, you start to fight, your emotional intimacy reduces, and then all of a sudden, marriage is exploding, right? So that's health problems are a big thing. Someone could be having they could feel insecure about their weight, or someone could be going to the hospital because of some other issue all the time. Just going to the hospital, it can be a very stressful experience. Going to the hospital. Just visiting someone in the hospital is a stressful experience. Has anybody ever visited someone in the hospital? That's a lot of work, man. You gotta go, you gotta park, right? You gotta find where you gotta go, you gotta check in. Just to visit someone, you gotta check in at the security desk, take your ID out, and then you gotta go, and that smell in the hospital, that hospital smell, right? There's that smell, and then you walk in, you don't know who else is gonna be in the room, especially for Egyptians, there's always 100 people in the room, no matter what time of day it is. And then you don't know, you're there, and this person is sick. It's not like you're gonna leave with the person. You're not. They're going to be there. You have no answers, right? But it's a lot of work. Imagine what it's like for the patient, right? Imagine what it's like for the patient. They can't do anything either, right? A lot of times. That's body, so your body's affecting things. Soul, negative thought patterns, myths and false beliefs. There are so many false beliefs, so many myths about what's right and what's helpful. And we have to be comfortable challenging them. Biases, trauma and anxiety, spiritually, sin, temptation, disconnection from God, spiritual inertia, and flawed theology, right? There's flawed theology. Everyone is a publisher now, or an author, right? Everybody has a blog, right? Everybody's writing something, right? And we have to be careful about this, right? Just because something is documented and published doesn't mean it's right, right? And we have to clarify things when it comes to theology, because sometimes your belief about God affects what your connection is with God, right? So if God is going to be a resource to someone and they have a false belief about who God is, that's going to destroy the connection with that resource altogether, right? Family, generational patterns, unspoken rules, poor modeling, expectations, boundary violations, and then culture. We talk so much about the stigma of dealing with mental health illness. By the way, you guys, I just want you to know, by you being here, this is a revolution, by you guys being here, right? It's very, very important. You are making a big shift in our community just by giving attention to this stuff and by being willing to learn. It's a big deal by you being here. And I love the fact also, just a little extra plug, that there's a good proportion of men and women here, right? Because usually this is a very women thing, right? But actually we're well balanced, so which is good. We need more of everyone, and everyone needs to be more aware. It's very good. And then the social environment, availability of healthy friends, and willingness to deal with vulnerability. I want to tell you a very interesting thing. There's a researcher who did research on how men and their emotional rights or their emotional expression. And what she did was she recorded little kids, like when they were about 8 to 12 years old, she recorded them when they're describing their best friends. She recorded them when they're describing their best friends, voice recording. And so she recorded them, and things that they would say would be like, my best friend is so close to me, I love my best friend. There's another guy. And whenever I have a problem or whenever I'm sad, I go to him and he helps me, and I love my best friend, right? Then 5 to 10 years later, she recorded the same boys who are now like young men. And she says, can you describe your best friend and your relationship with your best friend, right? And then this is what you get. He's cool. He's cool. Not bad. I like him. We have fun. We do cool stuff, right? And you find that, look at what happens in society, that people are being stripped of their emotional rights, right? What you're entitled to express, what makes you a human being, part of the image of God that you are made in, which is to have emotions and to express them, right? To connect with others and to connect with God, right? We're being stripped of these things. So sometimes our social environment does not allow us to deal with vulnerability, which is so sad, because the vulnerability is the gold in life, right? The vulnerability, that's when you've struck oil or gold. That's it, right there. Whenever you find that spot that's hard to get into, you have two choices. Either you're gonna pull away, ignore it, suppress it, or you're gonna lean into it. When you lean into it, Christ will be there. And please, when you find those things, you have to know that you have to lean into them, right? Of course, in a healthy way. So there are many factors at play to interfere with your emotional health or with anyone's emotional health, right? You can't always trust your mind or your heart, right? Like it's difficult, right? Because the heart is deceitful. When you're hurt, you sometimes want to avoid further vulnerability, which separates you from the resources that you need, right? You need help. Change and grief create very similar emotional processes, by the way. Like if if there's a significant change in someone's life, one of the first things that happens when there's grief is denial, right? You just deny. I don't want to change, right? We're all stuck. I think it was just yesterday, someone said to me, I don't want to change. I hate it. I hate change, right? I'm like, listen, man, like it's good. It's a good thing, It's a good thing that's going to happen to you. Sometimes it's hard to justify emotional work because you don't see effects immediately, right? Actually, sometimes in therapy, it gets worse before it gets better, right? And you have to Like, and when we talk about what skills you can use, you have to be don't pull away from someone because they're getting worse. Like, that's really bad, right? Because they're starting to trust you, and then you pull away, you're gonna abandon them, right? And it's gonna be really bad. And then everything else, the past is often a very useful, but a very sometimes imperfect reference point. Many people try to repeat what happened in the past, right? And it becomes an unhelpful reference point. And the people around us often fail when it comes to providing support. All right, so the key messages so far, and then the last thing is some skills, is that as you can see, these things are complex, and it's not because of sin. Not because of sin, okay? Like someone who's struggling with depression or even like a situational anxiety, or they're just sad about their relationship isn't working out. A lot of times it's not about sin at all. We cannot separate all of these dimensions, and that our growth and healing involves others. So I want everyone here to be sensitive to the fact that there's something happening around you all the time. How can I help in my own community? I'm only going to talk about 2 steps, okay? 2 steps, and for each of these things, there's like 5 questions or skills, all right? The first thing you have to do is you have to get in touch with yourself. One of my supervisors told me something so amazing. He said it's going to take you 5 to 10 years to get out of your own way as a therapist, right? Which, is a little kind of sad, kind of discouraging, but the message I took from that, because I'm trying to be resilient, is I said, I need to get out of my own way, right? I need to get out of my own way, right? I can't interfere with the care that I'm trying to provide. And I'm going to show you some questions you can ask yourself. But the more in touch you are with yourself on all dimensions, the more you can support others. First question, how much of your life experience is clouding your ability to understand the other's experience? Because sometimes we make too many connections between what we think we know and what we've experienced, and we're trying to relate. Stop trying to relate. Try to understand. Try to learn, right? When someone comes up to you with something, it's not about relating. It's about understanding as much as you can, right? And who helps you understand? The other person. Genius, right? Who helps you understand? And how do you understand more? You ask questions, right? But ask yourself, does this remind you of anything, right? What worked for you may not work for the other. Be very careful, my brothers and sisters. Please be very, very careful. Be very, very, very careful about giving advice. Don't rush to give advice, okay? Rush to learn. Be very eager to learn, but don't rush to give advice, okay? You have to learn. Number 2, what is your current emotional state? Sometimes we're like stressed or anxious or tired or busy or whatever, and we're having a hard time focusing. Do you know how hard it is for a professional to stay focused with a client? It's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work just to stay present. I remember one time I was sitting with a couple in premarital counseling, and they just started talking about something, and then the woman in the couple, she just said something, and she reminded me of a talk that I had to give the next day, right? And then all of a sudden, my mind just went like somewhere else, right? I'm just thinking whatever, and then I'm like, no, wait, Makar, focus. And then I focus, and then I said, oh, so what I'm hearing is this is that. She's like, that's not what I said at all, but that's right, but that's not what I said at all, And I felt so bad. I said, oh my gosh, like it's clear, I'm not paying attention, right? So, but sometimes we're anxious about something else, and we're not able to be there with people and listen to what's going on with them, right? What do you want to get out of this interaction, right? And be very careful, please, when you have goals that are not the goals of the other person, right? Because sometimes we push people too hard to grow in a certain way. And I don't want you guys to do that, right? Like, you have to be careful and sensitive to what people are dealing with, right? You don't tell someone who has never come to church, and you tell them, oh, come to church every week, take communion every week, hurry up, let's go, be patient, slow down, And sometimes what we want to get out of the interaction is we want to be credited for the success of the situation, right? We want to feel good about it. Like, oh, I helped them, I feel so good about what I did for this person, right? And, and now I'm a resource to them, and I'm serving, right? But you have to get this stuff out of, don't even think about it. Don't think about what you want, right? Think about what is best for this person. And also, this is a little sensitive, right? But, it's very common in the church community when there's a couple who's struggling, that one of the most important things that any servant focuses on is don't let them get a divorce. No divorce, right? And from the very beginning, our goal is to keep them together, right? And so any hint that they're separating, we start to fight that or go push against that, right? But you have to put that goal aside, right? Let God deal with the covenant that he entered into, right? What you have to do is try to help the people and talk with them and listen to them, right? And be able to refer them to people who know more whenever that's possible, as soon as you can, right? What don't you know, right? Which is you have to ask these questions, and those dimensions that we showed could be very, very helpful. What don't you know? What don't you know? And even at work, I work in business most of the day, most of the week. And so, sometimes there's a bias, there's a bias called availability bias. By the way, there's hundreds of biases that we all have, right? There's a bias in the mind called availability bias, right? Availability bias is your mind wants to use the information available to it to make a decision. Because your mind doesn't want to work so hard, right? Your mind, but naturally, in this broken world, is very lazy, right? It's trying to get to the answer as quickly as possible, right? So one of the things that can happen at work, right, at least in the finance world that I'm in, is somebody puts something in front of you, right? They put something on the slide, right, and it's detailed, right? Your mind doesn't want to go through all the details, right? And your mind wants to hurry up and finish the meeting up. So you look at the information and you make a decision based on what's available. But there's a bias happening, which is availability bias. That you didn't ask yourself, wait, there's more work needed to find out what I don't know. What is not on the slide? What is not on the page? And when you're talking with people, you have to ask yourself, what don't I know? What's left? What else? What about this? What about that, right? How is this going, right? And you're going to discover a lot of very, very interesting things. What are other resources that are available to or needed for this person? Pretty much at the end of the day, no one who is serving anyone does it alone. At the end of the day, no one, that's it, right? So if you're providing any care to anyone, even in a very small way, a Sunday school kid, or somebody comes up to you just all of a sudden with a problem or they need to talk about something, you should very quickly be thinking about resources, right? Resources, professionals, books, community, social support, friends, all these things, right? And you have to start to ask about them. What about your friends, right? What about your family? What about this? So you can start to create a view of what other resources are available to this person. And then lastly, I want to talk about some skills, which is learn some skills. Anyone can gain and practice these skills, and the more skills you have, the more you can support others, right? First is move into and sit in the pain. We like to pull away from pain, right? We don't want to be near it. We don't want people to, it's very hard when someone starts crying. What do you do in that moment? It's very hard. And some of us, we start to get a little agitated, we start to move around, whatever it is, right? Or what if somebody starts yelling, right? I know growing up as a kid, yelling, there was a lot of yelling going on in my life. And whenever someone yells, I feel I start to cringe emotionally, right? I don't want to hear it. I don't like yelling, right? So even if I'm at church and the priest is yelling about something, I'm like, I gotta get out of here. I can't be here anymore. I don't like it, right? But I'm growing through that, right? But whenever there is pain or difficulty or challenge, right? From now on, as a Christian, Jesus never pulled away from someone's pain. right? He never moved away or pulled back, right? He always leaned into it, right? And please get used to this. Number 2 is slow down and focus as much as you can. We're also, I think Abuna was saying something very important about like how instant our society is and our culture is and our way of life is, right? Everything is quick. Everything is so quick, and we gotta hurry up and solve it, right? I remember one time I went and I sat with someone who's much older than me, and I don't know what was going on, but he was rushing the whole conversation. He was so busy, and I needed advice from him. I needed advice from this person. And they just kept going. And like in 7 minutes, he thought the conversation was over, and I felt like I had been like betrayed, you know? Like, why are you rushing this? I really needed your help. I needed to sit down and talk with you, right? But they just rushed through it. But we have to slow down all of these conversations. Don't be so so goal-oriented. Just be present. Be present and prayerful. Be present and prayerful. Next is a very simple tip, which is ask at least 5 questions. Maybe even 10. I really wish you could ask 10, but let's start with 5. Ask some questions, right? Don't feel this burden of having the solution to anyone's problem, right? I mean, it's already a lot of work for the professionals to do this, right? So don't think that you're all of a sudden responsible to solve what's going on with everyone, okay? Like, what I want you to do is just learn and be there for the person. By the way, very recently I was sitting with someone, this happens all the time, but I was sitting with someone and they started telling me what was going on, and they're like talking. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm gonna say to this person. Like, I have no idea how I'm gonna help, right? And so, I said, God, please be with me and help me to say something that's beneficial. I don't know God, like, it's so complicated, so difficult, so heavy, right? So many things going on, right? And then, I said some things and that was it. Next day, I get a text message for the person. Thank you so much for listening to me. It made such a big difference, right? I needed this so much, right? I did nothing except be there, right? And so that's what I, like in our society, we're always trying to take something tangible and concrete and show it in front of someone. Look what I did. Look at this thing that I achieved, right? But this is not how we work at all. Like, it's not how we work at all. Remember the baby steps, right? That Dr. Christine was talking about? There's baby steps, right? And sometimes the baby step is like an embryo step or whatever it is, right? It's a little step. You can't even tell that it happened, right? And sometimes there's like all these little pieces that are coming together that make a foot that could take a step, Like, don't be so progress and like goal-oriented sometimes. Just be with the person. And the last 2 things are, remember that each person's experience is true for him or her, right? And sometimes we make the very basic mistake of invalidating what people are going through. And this is really, really bad, because you immediately put a wall between you and this person. And again, remember, you might be the only person who they're gonna talk to, right? So when somebody tells you something, you need to know that what they're saying is true for them in that moment. It might not be true, but it's true for them in that moment. That is what they're going through. And that's their life. And that's their reality. And in the very severe cases where you must have a professional at all times, it's like, if people are dealing with, maybe delusions or hallucinations or, very deep depression or severe anxiety or anything like that, right? People who are dealing with these things, you can't rationalize, say, oh no, but of course, that's not true. Your life is better than that. Why are you so sad? What? Like for a professional to hear me say that, you're like, that's like the dumbest thing you could say, right? But sometimes we do that to people all the time, right? Somebody comes to you and they need something, and we're like, no, don't worry about it. You're gonna be good. It's all right. And it's not right. We have to believe that this is what this person is experiencing, right? And that's the truth for them in that moment, right? And then the work is slowly, carefully, with resources and help, right? To help them see their experience differently, right? To work through what's happening. Remember that each person remember, each person, each situation has a different level of readiness and timeline for change. And this one is so hard because many of us, we're very like ambitious, and we're very like, we when we see something we want to gain, we do it, right? We're very like, we want to be high achievers, especially in this tri-state area where life is so fast-paced and there's competition all the time, right? We want to achieve like things for ourselves all the time. So when you see a problem in someone's life, it's hard to believe that they actually might not want to change right now. They might not want to change, right? And that's something that you have to think about, right? There's an important model for change by, the last name is Prochaska, and they talk about how like people are contemplating change before the stage of contemplating change, or they're getting to a point where they're ready to make a change and then they have to maintain the change that they've made. And we can't just rush and assume that everyone around us is ready to change all the time, right? And that's something that we have to be assessing. Plus, all of this stuff is, in addition to the common skills, by the way, which is, I would have mentioned the active listening skills, the body language, the eye contact, the empathy, and like paraphrasing and what's going on. So before I continue, I just want to see some nods or lack of nods. Does everyone here feel, a bit more equipped to support the people around them after listening to some of the things we discussed? Yeah? I'm seeing, all right, I got like 60%, that's all right. For my high achieving self, I don't know if that's good, but 60% is good. No, so that's really good. And please guys, don't ignore your role. Again, don't ignore your role. And don't feel like, oh, I must be so perfect before I can help someone else, right? Again, you might be the only person someone is willing to text, right? And also, please do not underestimate, like we said at the very beginning, the role of God's mysterious work in everyone's life, which is, you cannot ignore that, and the role of the others, which is the professionals, right? And this is extremely important because, again, there's so many nuances that, like, it takes time. Mina actually taught me something very, he reminded me of something. Someone was facing a problem, and Mina and I were talking about it. And he said, Makar, you can't be putting like Band-Aids on situations, Like sometimes when a person they need like full care, right? And sometimes what we're doing without a professional is just like the conversation once every 2 or 3 weeks. And if that's all the person can take, then that's fine, right? But when people, like whenever I finish a session, one of the things I say is like, when is the next time we're gonna meet, right? That's a very simple question that we ask, right? So let's schedule the next session, depending, some places have like a regular schedule, but. So can you imagine that you meet with someone and then for an hour, and then you're gonna have, as a professional, you're gonna put in another hour, and then another hour, and then another hour. You're putting in so much time, right? In a very structured way. That's very hard for anyone who's not working in this to do, right? It's like almost impossible. Think about going to sit with your priest, right? Usually when at the end of my confession, my priest doesn't say, when are we going to meet next for your confession? He's going to be waiting for my text message or whatever to say, I want to go confess, right? So, like, there's a very specific role for these people, and you will connect everyone who is in need to a professional. So, to summarize what you can do to be a help, ask yourself questions. How much of my life experience is clouding my ability to understand the other's experience? What's my emotional state? Do I have a very specific goal in mind for something I'm trying to get out of the interaction? What don't I know? And what other resources are available to or needed by this person? And then in terms of skills, basic skills that you can apply, is move into and sit in the pain with the person. Just slowly, just be there. Don't pull away from a person who is in need. Slow down, 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 and focus as much as you can. Ask at least 5 questions. Remember, each person's experience is true for them. Like, don't invalidate what's happening with the person. And lastly, that each person in each situation has a different level of readiness for change, right? So it's not as simple as go change so you can fix your life, right? It's not like that at all, right? It's not like that at all. Any questions? There will be Q&A.
Yeah. So just thank you so much, Makar. That was tremendous, and I think it was a perfect way to sort of bring the day together, incorporating a lot of elements that we talked about, and kind of bring it all home. So just thank you again beforehand for Makar. So what I'm going to do now is if we can just ask the speakers, Abuna, Dr. Pristine, Park, if you guys can just hop on, and if Dr. Haney's here too, Andrew, please. I know by proxy, it counts. And you guys, the website, I'll put it up on the screen as well, but it's menti.com. As we're setting that up,